Hello and welcome to the All About Pigeons podcast. I'm Phil,
And I'm Chris.
and today we have with us Rick Barker. He is a international judge of fancy pigeons. He's been an international judge he's been a judge of pigeons for 57 years, traveled the world doing it. He's a master breeder of Modinas, turbits, and Warburg shield croppers. And we really appreciate you coming on today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So can you give us just a brief introduction into pigeons and how you got into judging?
Well, the very early part was just like anybody else. I was 8 or 9 years old and I would catch wild pigeons. And my grandfather came by one time and told me there was a pigeon fancier on his block. Went to see this guy. Ralph Sutherland had fantails and helmets. For Christmas present, I got a couple pairs of pigeons, and then my Modinas really started in March of 1962. And the reason I remember that month, there used to be a magazine called the American Pigeon Journal, and it came out monthly, and the Modena special was March of 62. And of course, I fell in love with Modinas at that moment. Had them ever since. I was as a young person, fanatical about Modinas. I really, really liked them. I did all kinds of things. Would hitchhike to Phoenix to a show if I couldn't drive or my car was broken. I camped out because I couldn't afford motel rooms during the late 60s. So I started judging probably in the early 70s. Apparently people liked the way I judged, and I continued all the way up to about my last judging assignment for Modinas now was probably 2016. I've been asked to judge 3 shows this year. I don't like to make those kind of commitments anymore. And the reason why, opportunities to do different things come up, and including going to Germany or something like that. And if I made a commitment to judge in Texas, then I have to decline that opportunity. So at my age, I'm 74, being able to go internationally with some very close friends, a little bit more important than judging. But I go to every national. I've been to 45. It might very well be I've been to more nationals than anybody else in the country, which is not necessarily a great thing because a couple of the guys before me have passed away. Hopefully I'll be able to go to 10 more at least. But anyway, the judging, I probably have judged, I would say probably Modinas in 15 states and Canada. And like I said earlier, the National Modena Club annual show in England. I've judged in Norway, Germany, France, South Africa, and Australia, and Canada.
We've gotten around the world.
Well, I was fortunate in one way. I married a flight attendant, and I still get to fly free. So there were a lot of crazy things I've done over the years. In fact, somebody has asked me to write an article about all those things. When we first hooked up, TWA had a nonstop flight every noon to go to Heathrow, London, and I didn't have much money, being a newlywed, but I could fly free on a 747, and it would arrive in London at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'd be able to rent a car. I would drive to the show maybe an hour or two from the airport, go to the show, spend the entire day there, and then come back to the airport and catch the night flight back to LAX. And nice. I did that probably 3 or 4 times. The other things I've done many times is going to either Nuremberg or Leipzig or Ulm or something like that. Dusseldorf, and somebody will say, well, did you see the big cathedral there? No. Well, you certainly saw the old town. No. Well, what did you do? Well, I went to the hotel, I went to the pigeon show, I went back to the hotel and the pigeon show, and I came home. That has been my life for 55, 60 years of traveling. And so that's one of the reasons I said in the earlier comment about not making commitments. From now on, I'm going to actually spend an extra 2 or 3 days to see what I've missed all these years.
Sure.
So, a friend of mine in Kansas, Willie Reichert, and I are talking about going to the Leipzig show in Germany in January. Excuse me, that would be December.
Nice. When you got started in pigeons, did you have anybody take you under your wing? Kind of mentor you?
Well, yes and no, not directly, but indirectly. There were in South Los Angeles a huge number of kids that raised pigeons, and there used to be a racing homer guy that was also a show guy. His name was Bill Rice, And he, in 1967, was the only person ever to be president of the American Racing Pigeon Union and the president of the NPA, National Pigeon Association, simultaneously, because he also had show racers. There was a woman that lived in Westchester, California. Her name was Peggy Horn. Now, we're not talking about the Peggy Horn that used to live in Texas. And she raced turbits and show races as well. And they started a junior pigeon club because all of us kids wanted to raise racing pigeons. We couldn't afford it. We didn't even know what we were doing. So the Southwest Pigeon Fanciers came into play, and at one time we had over 200 members under the age of 18. And this is why some of the names that you might know in pigeons, whether it's Bob Nolan, Bill Griebel, Tally Mezzanato, Fred Mainpaw, Frank Soto, those are all people that I met back in the early 60s at the Southwest Pigeon Fanciers. So senior advisors, I think you would say. There were, certain people that would reach out to us, but seriously, you go to some of those meetings on a first Friday of every month, and there was so much traffic, the police would actually help out, allowing parents to drop their kids off. Some of my very close friends in the pigeon fancy today, I mean, I've literally known for 60 years. Direct mentorship, I would say not too much. Now in turbits, there was a gentleman by the name of Don White who passed away about 2 years ago. And I started in turbits back in probably 1964 and 65. And he had them up until about 1972. And I was the only one in Southern California that had them. And then he came back in the hobby about 1994 until he passed just a few years ago. So you would say in turbits, he might have been my mentor.
It's always something that we always recommend to somebody getting into it is you can find yourself a mentor, especially breed specific, like you're saying you had with the turbits. It just saves a lot of headaches and gets you going in the right direction and, put your energy in a good way.
I think just that, when you mentioned Vincent Pizzuto, well, his dad is certainly a mentor, but, when young kids, when he was, 12 or 13, he was very, very active. They'd come to the show and Ray would just walk up to him and he goes, "He's yours now for the next 2 days." And I'm not kidding. I mean, Vincent would follow me around like a little puppy dog. And so I certainly mentored, along with his dad, Vincent. And I've also exposed him to a lot of different other breeds. And I've mentored quite a few people. Some of them have stuck and some just haven't. Most of them now are in racing homers.
That's great. Yeah, that's definitely stuck with Vincent. He's a good judge.
Yes, he is a good kid.
We're starting to do he's starting to do mentorships with other young people in the club. So that's great, man. It's really just keep on passing down. When you go to a show and you're judging a show, is there any kind of like reoccurring problem? Like what do you say like the most common problem or default or kind of check mark against, various breeds that fanciers are doing?
Faults being constantly produced that are not being addressed, or like what would be like is there even, I guess, for that matter there could. In Modinas, and you guys might know, there's supposedly 152 colors, but there's well over 75 that are actively being bred. Now maybe there's only one or two guys in the country that might have Andalusian Gazi, let's say, but the big issue with Modinas, the structure, the power, and the depth have been well identified, and a lot of times because of crossing blues to blacks or something like that, color quality sometimes is an issue. In some cases, color is 20 points, which is quite a bit for an individual part of the bird. And so if the birds are not up to par color-wise, they're placed down, and they could otherwise be outstanding Modinas. Because they're outstanding in structure and power and depth and everything else, people still continually breed them, and in such sometimes will breed continually a little bit poor color. Now, maybe not poor color, but mediocre color. The winning birds have good color, along with all the other points that a Modena requires. And turbits, a different type of breed. One of the things that turbits are starting to get a lot of is they're supposed to have a peak crest, which is a pointed crest, and a lot of them are now getting a regular crest, somewhat like a helmet. And once you get that in your birds, you just can't deal with it. And so those are things that people just have to address. Good birds come in bunches of one, And so when you're breeding those birds and you have a superior bird in all other aspects other than a fault, you'll still continue to breed it. But unfortunately, that faults tend to surface far more than real strong or great points. So I would say color and Modinas is probably the one issue that is, while it's being addressed, you can still go to the show and see a good 10% of the birds not quite what they should be, or the pattern on a you call it a check, it's a tri-pattern bird, it might not quite be right. The edging on the barn may not quite be right. So I would say that's the number one issue. It used to be legs that were not quite straight or this or that, but that's been addressed for years. So now you really do have some outstanding specimens.
And you've been judging long enough that the standard has changed on some of these breeds. And so you've had to kind of make adjustments there too?
It's a maturity. You're right. If you look at some of the old pigeon journals and you see birds that won in the 60s and 70s or 50s, you think, what the hell's that? What are those?
Yeah.
Why, compared to what's going on today? So yes, the birds have changed. And when my friends come from Europe, they like coming to California, and they like, obviously going to San Diego, and it's a different environment. And they express some surprise every once in a while about how much the birds do change in every 10-year stretch. I don't think they've changed that much in the last 20 years, but I think between the years of 1960 to probably 1995, they changed a lot, to the point where a national champion in 1995 would probably not even be in the top half of the class, with some exception. There's always one or two birds that were way ahead of themselves or the rest of the breed. Two pigeons come to mind. Manfred Ecker out of Illinois had a Andalusian Sketty cock that was just tremendous, and people hadn't seen anything like that. And then my friend Dennis Wyrick had a russet tri or brown check Sketty hen in 1976 at the Fresno National that was way ahead of her time. Had power and depth and brilliant color, and people had never even seen that before. So those are the kind of things that allow the change. But you have about 10% or 15% of the Modena breeders that are very, very astute, very, very capable breeders. And hey, you better absolutely bring some good ones if you expect to compete.
And when you go to like these international places, they have a different standard. Are you just kind of working off of their book of standards when you do judging over there?
Their standard often is the same, but it's a different interpretation. If we happen to talk about women, for example, because that's something that most people can identify even with women, the standard of beauty, for example, in Brazil might be completely different than Iraq or Iran or Saudi Arabia versus Italy versus even Norway or Sweden. I mean, that's a weird analogy. What happens, and I see this in Europe right now, that there's one or two dominant fanciers, and people want to compete with them. And even though I see issues with those birds, and they are different than the U.S. birds, but the standard is pretty much the same, their interpretation is different. For example, the American Modena should be round from all angles and have a nice set of legs, maybe 2 inches long, even 2.5 inches. The Europeans, especially the Germans and the French, want a real round bird on short legs, and the bird almost looks like, to me, a hollycropper. So when I judge over there, I've got to take that kind of situation in consideration. I can't judge American style if I happen to be in Germany, but in all due respect, I haven't been to Germany in a long time judging. Norway, England is accepting the American bird. South Africa and Australia and New Zealand now is accepted the American birds. So it's only one or two, maybe three countries which have huge numbers of breeders that are different than the American bird.
And I know, like the Rare Breeds Club, they have a mentorship system set up. What are some ways that someone's interested in going to that level of becoming a judge? Obviously, would you say start by building up points, becoming a master breeder, and focusing on that breed? Or
well, yeah, you have to focus on the breed to begin with, and then once you start, not necessarily taking champion, but being very consistent and you're winning within a specific color, then because as one of you indicated, judges are kind of scarce right now, so they're going to reach out and take some of the newer people that may not have judged before, but they breed and exhibit excellent pigeons, and so they certainly recognize that kind of quality. The difficulty sometimes when you see a person judge like that is that there's one thing of identifying a very good pigeon, but there's another thing of trying to place them 1 through 15, and you might have 5 or 6 very good pigeons on the front end. That is kind of intimidating to a lot of the new people. Ray Pizzuto, for example, has become very comprehensive in judging, and the one thing that I think that both of those guys have taken, I'm very vocal when I judge, and I tell people exactly why I'm looking at birds in a certain way, and I tell people exactly why I'm placing them in a certain way, because I don't want anybody to second guess. Now they may disagree with my opinion, that's fine, but they're not going to really say, well, what is he looking at? Because I tell people clearly what I'm looking at and what I'm looking for. And I think because of that, I'm at one time was a preferred judge. Both Ray and Vincent, for example, the 2 guys that you mentioned, both have kind of followed my footsteps in a way. So when you say even mentorship, I don't want to say too much that I've mentored Ray Pizzuto, the father, but I think that if you talk to him, he would probably tell you that by observing my type of judging, I'm not saying the way I judge, but my type of judging, he's kind of followed suit on that.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it when, because they do that when they're judging. They will say what they're looking for right now and what they like to see in this breed. And I think that helps the breeders of those breeds to kind of also be on board with the standard. And obviously,
right,
you want to get to that point.
I actually, when my daughter and grandson were helping me with this Zoom, because I'm not on any media at all, social media, but I Googled Rick Barker judging, and there is a pretty decent video on YouTube, and I'm judging German Modinas up in Watsonville, and I'm explaining the standard, and I'm talking to probably 15 or 20 people, and that kind of gives an idea of what I do and why I do it. I don't want to be second guessed, and when you're judging a large show, it's oftentimes somebody will come to you at the end of the day and say, well, why did you pick that blue gazy young cock third rather than second or first? And I have they're talking about, because I just judged 300 birds. How do I remember that third place bird? But if you qualify every time you judge why you're doing it in a certain way, then there's no second guessing. And they may disagree with you, but they understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. The most important thing in judging is being consistent. I think that has been my strong point.
The disagreements, I guess, with, like you're saying, some people might not agree with what you picked and everything. Would that be one of the most difficult parts about being a judge? Or, you
no,
said
not
that
for
part.
me. I've got a pretty strong personality. I've heard Ray tell me that I'm intimidating to people. Not meaning, but if you're not a real qualified Modena breeder, you're not going to come up to Rick Barker and question why he did this that way, unless you've got some huevos. Basically, I don't think I've gotten any flack at all in the last 25 or 30 years of judging. And the people that might question something is if they didn't do very well and they're a new person and they've been told they've got a real nice bird and it should do very well. That's one thing. But when it gets into tough competition with the range of Modena breeders out there and the caliber and quality they are, you got to bring your A team. You can't bring a B team or C team and think you're going to do well. So I honestly can't recall the last time anybody second guessed. And it's not to say that they agreed with everything I said, but they just didn't come up to talk to me. And again, by being vocal when you're judging and telling people why you did things, when we're judging, we're right on top of the birds. Most of the exhibitors and people that are viewing it are 20 feet away. So they don't see an open back. They don't see a lot of things that you're looking at. And if you explain that, they're satisfied.
It's good that everybody has a clear understanding, what you're looking for and that kind of stuff. Have you ever judged any performance breeds?
Oh, you mean like rollers and racing homers?
Yeah,
Oh
well,
yeah, all the time. I've judged both show domestic flights, but also flying domestic flights. I've judged rollers at various shows, West of England tumblers, which are not, they're primarily a show breed now. They're not so much a flying breed. And then I'm always asked to judge racing at the various shows because these guys know that I race racing homers.
what are you looking for in a nice racing homer?
What makes a nice show racing homer does not necessarily make it a good homing pigeon.
Sure.
The one thing I don't like, and when you look at different strains, there's some different types of birds that, for example, the regular Jansons, I don't find as a very pretty bird. Some of them are a little bit pinched in the face, a little bit flat-headed, and they don't have a good expression. And expression is something that is very important in pigeons. You know, not Bocara trumpeters or Jacobins where you can't see the eyes, but birds with great expressions kind of seduce a judge. And oftentimes a bird will win out of turn, including Modinas, with a bird with a great expression. I want to see a racing homer that has a nice, round, smooth head in absolutely excellent condition. The eye is very bright, very brilliant. It could be any color, including pearl. But generally, I like one of those violet eyes, and I want to see that each point on that bird complements the other. You don't want to see wing butts on that bird. You want the wing butts hidden. You want the flights not to cross. You want to lay on the tail, you know, not flat, but, you know, lay on the tail. You don't want an open back. There's something called, the old roller guys used to call them buckboards, where you have the secondary stand up a little bit so it looks like it's a hole in the back. You're looking for a bird that is very alert and very robust and excellent condition, excellent flesh. To me, a bird, not a show racer head, but just a nice shaped head and neck and gullet, etc. One of the strains that used to excel in that, and I think it still does, are the Van Loons. The Van Loons have a very nice presence about them. Some of the other birds, Hubins, for example, these are birds from Germany and Belgium. The Hubins are not attractive pigeon, in my opinion. For the most part, we're not talking about every bird, but for the most part, they're not. But I've heard many times the most important part of a racing homer is his butt, because that's what you want to see go through the trap. Everything else is immaterial, and the Hubins will win. They're fast pigeons. They're kind of tough pigeons. And so the Hubins have taken pretty much a big storm in the United States. And now, of course, with the cross, the Van Loons were kind of an old world breed. There's still some people fly them. They're not quite as successful as some of these newer, younger guys in Germany and Belgium. You know, all the old guys have passed on, and some of these new guys have taken various strains and been exceptional with it. Looking at a racing homer, you want one point to complement all the other points on the body. And there's a certain presence that a very good show racing pigeon has where others just don't have it. And it's kind of hard. I wish I had some photographs that, you know, once I pointed one out, you definitely see it. Basically, there's not a real standard for racing homers. So unfortunately, it's whatever the judge thinks is a good bird at that time.
Sure.
Now, I have judged Blackpool, England, and that's a huge racing homer convention. Upwards of 30, 40, 50,000 people show for that. And they'll have 2,000 racing homers at the show. Each time I've judged what they call record homers, racers that record homer hens that have flown between 200 and 300 kilometers. They have to break it down, and so they might have 12 or 15 judges to judge Blackpool. And it's as crowded as a concert or a professional football game or something like that. It's crazy. It's a lot of fun.
So do you think a flown bird stands a chance in a show versus a bird that not flown, let's say?
Well, yeah, they're okay. And also in shows they have two categories, flown and not flown.
Okay.
And generally, now there is a show racing homer now that has been developed over the last 30 years, and that is completely different. But if we're talking about racing homers, generally what will happen if a bird is flying and it just finished the if we have, let's say, shows in November, December, and the guy is an active club flyer, that bird, a young bird that he's showing, is going to be probably have flown 500, 600, 700 miles. So it's not going to be able to compete. I'm talking about over the course of the races. It's not going to be able to compete in the show bird as on the showroom as a bird, for example, that was bred just to show. So generally those birds, the non-flown, will look better than the flown birds.
Sure.
And that's just, understandable in that respect.
Do you have any advice for people that are just beginning to get into the fancy and showing birds that you'd like to give?
Well, the big thing is to, when a new person comes in, to understand, what the difficulties might be. I'll digress a little bit, and I think that the average pigeon organization, including the NPA, including the AU, we are going after the wrong people. And the reason I say that is when a 10 or 12-year-old kid, girl or boy, is interested in pigeons, he's got to have a parent that's willing to deal with it. Then he's going to go through high school, get involved in sports, possibly college. He's going to give those birds up. It's a lot of energy to try to get those people involved. Where we're missing the point is the people that are recently retired. What I like about that, and I see this continually, they might have had birds when they were a kid, or they knew somebody that did, and they never forgot. So a person that retires at 60 has the financial acumen to be able to go to shows, to build a decent loft, to buy a sack of feed that's now $25 or more. It's kind of tough. When parents, there's a young person that wants to be involved in pigeons, but there's 3 or 4 brothers and sisters in Little League and soccer and all this other dance and gymnastics, the parents can't handle that. And guess what? The pigeons go. Our big thing is to get involved with the recent retirees. And I don't know if you guys know anything about the American Pigeon Museum in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, we plan on going there during the show.
Okay, I happen to be the president of it and very, very much involved. There, you can't believe that we've had about 30,000 visitors in the new building, and the great majority are not pigeon fanciers. There are people that used to have pigeons years and years and years ago when they were kids, and I've heard people walk in and they'll say, wow, I've got a friend, and I'm sure he doesn't mind me telling, a friend that just moved into my neighborhood. I live on, everything is 5 to 10 to 20 acres where I live. And his name is Steve Graves, and he was one of the #1 orthopedic surgeons in the world. And he went all over to give seminars, etc. When he was in Melbourne, Australia, he remembered having pigeons with his father. But his father died when he was 11 years old of a heart attack, and he never forgot. And he immigrated to the United States and moved to the location where I'm at because of the horses and stuff we could have there. And he started getting involved in buying pigeons from Romania, Belgium, and Germany without knowing one pigeon fancier. He just went online and saw the one loft races like the Hoosier, Texas Center, and stuff like that, and found out that I only live 3 miles from him. Not only is he's become a rabid pigeon fancier at 65 or 66 years old, because he remembered what it was and the joy that he had. We can't compete with this outside issues. We can't compete with social media. We can't compete with a lot of the more exciting things that the kids can do these days. The big problem with the fancy pigeons, let's face it, guys, you probably are going to have a local show in your area. I don't know if the Arizona Pigeon Club is going to have a show in Phoenix, but you can come to the pageant, certainly, which is for you guys about 7 hours away, and then the Oklahoma City National. So you have 3 shows a year. Well, with racing homers, you're flying 8 to 10 races in the spring and 8 to 10 races in the fall. And if you want to compete in the one loft races after the regular racing season, it's possible that you could have 25 to 30 weeks of year of activity. So it's kind of tough for us to focus on youth when there's so many things going against it. And we have a real issue. In fact, I just wrote an article for the National Inna Club. When I first joined in 1962, there were 40 NMC members within 40 miles of Los Angeles. And there were probably 50 members in California, or more more than that, even 60. Today, there's only 3 people in all of Southern California, and they're both 75 miles from me. And the next closest is a guy in Bakersfield that's 250 miles from me. We now have 11 Modena breeders in the state of California. The National Modena Club had 450 members not too long ago. Today we have 170, of which 15 at least are international members. In California, again, I'm not trying to be a negative or something like that. I'm one of the youngest. I am the youngest old guy. 8 of the 11 breeders are either 80 years old or pushing 80, 70, 78, 79, or 80. You know, I'm the 8th guy at 74. Where are we going to be in 5 years? You know, and you look at the national, or excuse me, the pageant of pigeons. We used to have 4,500 to 5,000 just a few years ago. Now we're struggling to get 2,000. Des Moines used to have 5,000. I understand they only had 2,500 last year. Now Oklahoma City National will be huge. It'll be big just because it's the center of the country. We're involved, guys, in an organization and a sport that is truly dying. We need to change things up and not do the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. I truly believe that where we need to focus on is the recently retired people that have at least 20 more years or 25 more years to live. And more importantly, like in my case, I'm affecting 2 other generations, my immediate children and my grandchildren. My grandson that I'm using his computer is crazy about pigeons, but his mom says, well, you can keep him at grandpa's house, you know, but he wants to come over all the time. And once he gets a little bit older, I'll start taking him to shows. Anyway, I don't know if that answered your question, but.
That's great. I mean, that clicked in my head, the Gulf Coast Homing Club down in Florida.
Oh yeah.
That's the biggest race club here in the States, and it's because it's a retirement community. So I mean, that is on point with exactly what you're saying, and you're still influencing the youth, because they got families, and you know, it's that, you know, seeing the birds still and everything else. Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I have quite a few friends from California that actually moved to the Gulf Coast, the GHC, and it's an entire lifestyle. It's not just about raising pigeons, but some of the guys golf, some of the guys play tennis, some of the guys are fishermen. When a couple of the guys were approached about being involved in the museum, they kind of passed it off, because originally some people were thinking of putting the museum down there, which would have been a mistake, by the way, because we have far more people in California with showbirds and racing pigeons. But anyway, in a confined area, one guy said, I don't want to mention his name, but a very nice guy, he said, you know, we're in the twilight of our years. We want to enjoy each other. We want to socialize. We want to raise pigeons. We don't want to deal with all the debris of trying to do all this other stuff in pigeons. We don't want to be involved in that. We just want to enjoy our remaining years. That's the unfortunate part with the GHC. And what's really helping Florida is the Hispanic and Cubans that have taken the sport up tremendously. Our largest club in Southern California is the Compton Club, and I believe that 80% of the club now is Hispanic. And these guys are tough flyers. They're fanatics and very, very good handlers. So if you get in a club like that, you better bring your A team, because you're going to get beat. But yeah, the GHC is a club that's destined to go under eventually, because not a lot of young people are going to go to Tampa, Florida, or that area to go to live. There's not enough industry there, but it's a great retirement area.
Well, that's pretty amazing. I really, that's some pretty on point stuff right there. Well, we're up against the clock here. Chris, did you have anything else for Rick here?
You had a favorite pigeon?
Have I ever had a favorite pigeon?
Yeah, your favorite pigeon, one that you probably give a name to.
Well, the best win that I've ever had, and I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of wins. In fact, in Vorburg Shields, for example, in the last 25 or 30 years, I've only been defeated once. In the last 5 or 6 years, I haven't been defeated turbits at all. In Modena's, I dominated along with another friend of mine. My best win, and I'll try to make this very brief, was in 1966, and it wasn't for champion. I was a young kid, and the national was in Costa Mesa, California. There were 3 black Gazzy cocks. That's my favorite color. A guy Raffensperger in Pennsylvania had band number 99. Dr. Sam Peavy in Kentucky had, I think his band number was 725. And there was a guy in New Mexico, Charles Stamp, that had 66. Those 3 cocks were winning everywhere. So I was very intimidated, but I did show 3 birds. I beat the old cocks, and I had best old hen and best young cock. And that was the show that I made my mark. And going from a point of such great intimidation to great elation. And when I went to talk to the judge about it, I said, well, how come my bird beat them? And he goes, what, are you stupid? And I go, well, I don't think so. He goes, your birds were very much better than those others. So, and incidentally, my black Gazzies originally came from Bill Pensum of Pensum roller fame. A lot of people didn't know that Bill Pensum used to raise Modinas and also Tipplers. So that was my best win ever. And even though I've won champion many times, I still think about that win.
Very cool. Yeah, it's cool that you remember all the band numbers too.
2217 was a cock, 3729 was a young hen, and 117 was the old hen. And that was way before you guys were born. But anyway, thank you. I know we're running out. Also, when you go to Oklahoma, if you go to the Oklahoma National, just ask anybody for Rick Barker. They'll point me out. I'll be there. And also, have you ever come to the pageant of pigeons?
No, we have not. We're still trying to start getting out to some more shows. So yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ray and Vincent are coming for sure. Hitch a ride with them.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. This has been good, everybody. Check out that YouTube, Rick Barker, Judge of Pigeons. You can watch him there. And, if you guys can, come to the Nationals. You can check out the American Pigeon Museum, too.
We'll have a shuttle that will probably go 6 or 7 times a day, back and forth. The show is not in the convention center. It's at the fairgrounds. So we're probably talking about 8 miles away. Museum is 8 miles away from the show.
That's cool. They got a shuttle. That'll make it real easy.
Yeah, we'll have probably 2 or 3 shuttles, actually.
All right. Well, we'll see you at the Nationals then.
All right. Thanks, guys, very much.
Thanks, Rick.